So when I was a kid, I grew up on a subsistence farm in northern New York. And in the barn, there was this big stone, whetstone. And it was, if you can picture like a millstone, just a big flat stone, but it was upright. I don't know how much it weighed, several hundred pounds, I guess. And the stone looked like a wheel, but it was maybe about this wide, maybe about 6-8 inches wide, and maybe 3 feet across. And it was sitting on this axle, and you would use it to sharpen plows or knives or axes or whatever. And as a kid, it was really fun to go in and push on it, and it was so heavy, like you would exert an enormous amount of energy on that first push, and then you would exert the same amount of energy, but now it would be creeping forward a little bit. And you'd push on it again, and each time you pushed with the same amount of strength, it would go a little bit faster. It would be storing up that energy in the form of inertia, and eventually that thing would be spinning around, and you almost didn't want to touch it. It was spinning around so fast you'd have to try and keep up with it. But at the bottom was this foot lever that I don't even know how it worked, to be honest, but you would push on it, and it would kind of like almost like wasn't like a bicycle pedal, but it was something you would push on, and it would just add a little bit more force to that wheel. And you would just do it every once in a while just to keep the momentum up as you were grinding on your plowshare or whatever. That feeling that I have about pushing on that big old whetstone as a kid is the feeling that I have about flywheels. Some kind of a system that you exert some pressure on, and it starts to spin a little bit. You exert a little more effort on, and eventually you get that system operating, so all you have to do is just add a little bit of energy every once in a while in order to have the kind of output that you want the system to create. You guys know I've written a lot, made a lot of videos about flywheels and the mechanics and the kinds of things that I create that uses flywheels, and project management, my accounting flywheel, my daily, weekly, monthly, yearly flywheel, all that stuff. But that's the feeling I have about how I think the kinds of systems that a flywheel will operate will work and how it will feel. It doesn't always feel like that, but in part it's, with that whetstone, you've got to get the kind of the cage or the mount that it's in that sits on the floor, and then there's this little trough, almost like the bottom part of a tire, that's filled with water that keeps the whetstone wet, and there's actually an axle on the side that you can crank, is one way that you can operate, or you can push on it, and you've got to get the pedal, and the whole system has to come together, and then you have to exert the energy. And a lot of the flywheels I've been working on for a long time, they work hit or miss, or they're not quite creating the output I want them to. But in part it's because I'm still creating the framework or creating the system and feeling my way forward, trying to figure out what to tweak, what needs to be abandoned and what needs to be added in order to get the system to produce what I want it to. And that's kind of, in a sense, that's how I operate in life. That's kind of, in a sense, my life work. Like, that's what I've been doing since I was a kid. Finding ways I could exert an enormous amount of energy so that the system will then produce the output that I want without me having to get a lot of input. Similar, say, to an entrepreneur who, works 18-hour days for 5, 6, 7 years so that he can get a company operating without him, where he's no longer having to, or she is no longer having to give the input, but the system is operating on its own, like a franchise, where the guy that created the franchise might not even know where all the franchises are, but they're all They're all operating like he created them to operate 20 years ago. So that's just the kind of system I'm interested in creating. That's the kind of thing that I'm fascinated with. With fractal productivity, that I've really been working on for years, and really finally got a little bit of enough clarity to understand how to put the whole thing together in a way that works, I thought. And now it's starting to hum along like I had always dreamed it would. And I was thinking this morning about the system and the flywheel and what it is, and I actually made a video that I sent to my coach Jim and a friend, and was explaining kind of the whole picture of how it was operating, and I felt kind of surprised that it was all working so well. And it was all contingent on this one little tiny input, tiny, insignificant, humorous input that my coach an hour or so ago reminded me actually was what we had actually figured out, that we needed that input, and we designed the input for it. And then I promptly forgot that we had created a place for that in the system, and then deployed a mechanic to get it to operate. So I now remember the conversation, but I'd forgotten about it, where I'd said, everything seems to be working pretty well, or theoretically would work pretty well, if only I could do my daily flywheel consistency without interruption. The whole dynamic I've created is contingent on consistency at that one point. Getting up in the morning and doing my daily flywheel stuff, which is a set of tasks I want to do in the morning. I said, I think if I could get that operating flawlessly, the rest of the system would operate almost without energy. So Jim, in a moment of inspired genius, which often occurs when I'm talking to Jim, because he's a good coach, said, well, okay, if you just need to get your daily flywheel done, and he understood what I meant by that. We've talked about it at length before, which is a set of about 10 tasks I want to do in a particular order each morning. He said, why don't I just text you in the morning, and we'll text each other and either say, I've fallen off the bandwagon, or I've got my feet on the floor and I've got my flywheel engaged. So we added a friend into that. So now there's 3 of us who just check in around 5:45 to 6 o'clock in the morning. And it's actually turned into this who can out humor each other with funny GIFs about getting up. So my wife calls it the GIF Fest, because 3 to 10 GIFs will fly back and forth and getting funnier and funnier all the time. And I had forgotten that was a mechanic that I had deployed into the system, and to me it was just a funny way to get up between friends. But what that little tiny bit of non-judgmental, mild accountability that took the form of a joke, those 3 things in combination, not dependent on one person, but on 3. So if I'm kind of sleeping in, but Jim's up, he'll text me and our friend, and one of the 3 of us will get up and text. Very, very, very seldom do none of us get up on time. So it's almost this external form of input that's not dependent on any one person being particularly motivated that day to get up and do what we decided we wanted to do. And everything's that whetstone started to turn, and every morning just a little bit of a push on it. Just a little bit of a push that wasn't dependent on me. It wasn't hard. It's this little tiny action that I look forward to, because it's like the first thing I do is try and get up and figure out the funniest joke I can and send it off to my buddies. So there's no inertial force demotivating me. Like, I'm not telling myself get up and do the 10 things. All I'm saying is okay, it's time to get up and send out a funny GIF. But that shift has been enough to consistently get me up and engage with my morning flywheel. And as I was, it's like make coffee, brush my teeth, take my vitamins, fill our water bottles for the day, stuff like that. It's nothing significant in a sense. It's not like I'm doing really, really, really important stuff. Brushing teeth is kind of important in the end, but you know what I mean. It's not this amazing, I meditate for 30 minutes and then think elevated thoughts for 30 minutes. It's just the things I want to do in the morning. And I realized in order to do that well, as I started to do that every morning, this would have been last October or November, December timeframe, as I was starting to really work on the fractal productivity stuff, I would wake up in the morning and do it and realize, you know what? I wish I had done my nighttime flywheel stuff, because I've got this daily flywheel, part of which is my morning flywheel. But if I haven't done my evening flywheel, I would feel a little bit behind. So that started to motivate me to do my nighttime flywheel before I went to bed, to kind of prepare. So that'd be like getting the coffee stuff ready and out and ready to turn on the kettle, setting the stage for the morning well, making sure I have my task list and workflowy, set and ready for the day, that kind of thing. So that text message triggered me doing my morning flywheel. My morning flywheel triggered me doing my evening flywheel. And then the same thing, I've got this when I get home flywheel, and then midday flywheel. That's all part of my daily flywheel. And that started to hum. I just started to do it just because I was going to be sending a GIF in the morning. That little input started to spin that daily flywheel. Embedded in the daily flywheel are things that kind of push against my weekly flywheel, like another wheel that's getting, cogs that are getting turned. And the weekly flywheel started to operate because I was doing my daily flywheel. And so the kind of the fractal productivity, when I finally figured out that it needed to be, for me, calendar centric, not task list centric, I was like, all of the equipment got put into place for things to start to really hum. So while the fractal productivity concepts of approaching the task list from the calendar, asking questions, I think is really important. I think that's an important step forward for me. It was getting pushed on by this spinning daily flywheel, so that whatever I plugged into my weekly plan was much, 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 like 70% more likely to get thoroughly engaged with because of the engagement of my daily flywheel. And then as my daily flywheel started to spin week after week after week, connected to the daily flywheel, things were really humming. Then I could begin to plug in. It was almost like on the weekly flywheel would be this axle that went off with with fly rods. That's not the right word. Camshaft, not a fly rod, camshaft. And the camshaft began to turn, and the cams were operating pistons that are engaged against other areas of responsibility. So I began to plug in, I have begun to be able to plug in more and more areas of responsibility, kind of more productive, fruitful output that's connected to my weekly flywheel because it's operating. So and now I'm beginning to think, okay, what are my longer term goals? What do I want to do this quarter and this year that I can begin to attach to my daily and weekly flywheel to get those things operating and do more and more accurate long-term planning and plug those into the fractal productivity system. I say all that to say, it's all contingent on that one little 2-minute section each morning that's giving a push on the flywheel. And that, for me, is my leverage point. And I think different people have different kinds of leverage points, where if you figure out some particular element of your life, the rest of your life will begin to operate more smoothly. For me, it was getting up in the morning, which I don't have a problem doing. I've always gotten up early, but getting up in the morning and engaging with something particular repetitively over and over and over and over again, and trusting myself to do that, began to make the whole system work well. And so whenever I think in all of my talk and writing about flywheels probably muddies the water more than helps to some extent, hopefully reasonably valuable. But this is this feeling of kind of effortless, just a little bit of effortless input, like just pushing a little bit on that whetstone every once in a while, every 30 seconds, just kind of getting it cranked back up to full speed because had kind of flagged a little bit. Looking for that leverage point in a system. For me, it's a weekly planning session and a kind of daily activities. Is the important thing that makes it a flywheel. So a flywheel generally looks like a checklist, but it needs to be a checklist that you do, obviously, not just have. And so finding that leverage point that consistently gets you to do the critical activity that's central to the whole system that's kind of the feeling of a flywheel, that it stores energy and just give it a little bit of repetitive input at key repetitive kind of rhythmic points in time. And so, that's my weekly and daily plan, and that's how it works in a project management situation. It's, I have a system for getting the project completed by going through this cycle about 3 times a week. And each time I give that a spin, it moves the project forward and lets me see deeper and deeper into the project. For accounting, so for me, with the project management and making sure that gets done well, it's more finding a consistent time. So when I was project managing before, it was me leaving. If I would leave the house when I drop the kids off at the bus around 6:30 and head into town, that puts me in town either at a job site or a coffee shop around 7:30, and gives me about an hour typically before I had to have any meetings or whatever. And so that would be my time to kind of push on that. But the trick was leaving the house when I dropped my kids off. And if I would do that, I would consistently have that time. So that was a little leverage point. For my accounting flywheel, the leverage point, this is funny, the accounting flywheel, it's mostly data entry and reconciliation, which is kind of mindless work, except for about a 10-minute chunk where I'm doing some real thinking and organization at the very end. But it probably takes me an hour and a half, maybe a couple of hours a week. And so the leverage point for me was, and I'm fine with it, I'm decent at it. I've run my own QuickBooks for 18 years or so it's reasonably easy. But I've created a flywheel that's kind of mindless. I've oriented it and sorted it in such a way that I just don't have to think about what to do next. And all it is enough mental energy to categorize a transaction in QuickBooks Online accurately and put it in the right job, which is pretty mindless. But that's when I'll actually watch a movie or a TV show while I'm doing it, because you can't get it wrong. I mean, you'd have to try hard to get it wrong. So I just start at the top of my flywheel, have enough energy, usually watch like The Office or something I'm familiar with that doesn't require a lot of attention. So the leverage point is the enjoyment of watching a TV show I enjoy. So that pulls on me like, hey, you know what? You may not feel like doing your accounting, but you get to watch The Office or Parks and Rec or whatever. And so that's the little leverage point for me that gets that flywheel humming, so I keep up to date on my accounting, make better financial decisions, see things that I need to account for sooner. And like the whole benefit of being up to date on your accounting and doing a little bit of accounting planning is all driven by the fact that I actually look forward to it, because that's when I watch, Michael Scott be an idiot. So yeah, so I just wanted to contribute that to the general idea. I know a lot of people have had some questions about flywheels and what they are, and are they just checklists? Yes and no. They're checklists with particular dynamics associated with them. And so it's not just a checklist to get something done, but there's like a rhythmical nature to them. There's self-improving, because each time you go through them, if you see a better way of doing that, you can improve it. And since it's in workflowy and it's a resettable checklist, if I make an improvement to that list, it just gets improved immediately, and then I just reset the newly improved checklist, and it just improves itself over time. And it's scalable, because it's something I'm going to do once a day, or once a week, or once a quarter, or whatever horizon that flywheel is at. So each time it gets a little bit better, a little bit smoother. So, planning my wife's birthday is a lot easier now than it was, say, 5-6 years ago, because every effort I've put into it gets accumulated into my family year flywheel, that part of that cog of the family year flywheel. So hopefully that helps. If you have any particular questions, or if you have something you think that kind of a system might apply to, but can't quite see how it might work, reach out to me. I'd love to, this is my playground, so it'd be like me playing, trying to figure out where the different parts of the system might operate, and where the leverage point that you could push against on the system to get something done. So whether it's health related or work related, or just anything that's kind of rhythmical in your life, or that you want to be rhythmical, I would be happy to talk to you about that. So hopefully that helps. I'm at 21 minutes and 52 seconds, so typically not short-winded.